Hello everybody and good afternoon. After several of my followers have requested that I do this in English because they want to understand basically what's going on here in Hellas with the government and the changes in the system of government here, because it's a little bit different than the rest of the world. Obviously, every country has their own system of government. And I started off with a question. The question was, is Mr. Mitsotakis the problem, or is he a symptom of the problem, which is the system? And the reason I ask this is because right now, because of several bad moves and I would say very illegal actions that have been going on within the country, it has led to the government teetering on the edge. It looks like the administration is going to fall, and we're going to probably have elections later on this year. So when we go back to the ballot box and we start voting again, are we going to vote somebody in from the same system? Are we going to keep the system the way it is? And is that going to be good for the people of this country here in Hellas? And what we've seen is, yes, everyone has heard about the economic crisis, but they haven't seen the background, what led to this economic crisis, what's leading to our problems right now, why we haven't gotten out of the economic crisis, and why actually things are getting worse. Let's start off with the Constitution, right? So the government is set up based on a constitution. The constitution here in Hellas was written in 1822 after the Revolutionary War of 1821, where after 400 years of subjugation under the Ottoman Turks, the Hellenic people, they rebelled, and we fought them off, and we created the new Hellas, the new country of Hellas. And this country had to have a constitution, obviously, had to have a government, and in 1822 they wrote down the constitution. This constitution from 1822 till today, 2025, has changed, not amended, has been changed completely 12 times. Okay, now in the beginning, the first couple of years, yes, there were some changes, and this is because there was no stable government. The War of Independence took about 9 years to come to an end, and we had to add the king and different changes, the bicameral parliament, and different things like that. But after this, for example, from 1986 till today, which is about 40 years, not even, the constitution has changed 4 times. So every 10 years, the government decides to have a vote and change the constitution. Why is this important? The stability of a nation comes from the Constitution. So if you change the Constitution willy-nilly just to suit your present-day laws that you want to pass, you won't have stability. The Constitution has to be stable. In the United States, we have a Constitution that has been there from 1776 till today, and essentially hasn't been changed. There have been amendments added to it, and for very serious reasons. After the Civil War, to give voting rights and freedom to the slaves. We also have an amendment that's giving rights to women, etc. These amendments are for very substantial changes that give freedoms to the people. The changes that have been done here in Hellas are giving more power, centralizing power to the political class. And let me explain what's going on. So, we've had several changes, and we'll go into detail when I do the Constitution podcast, which is next. One of the changes was obviously to remove the king, and then they put in place a president. Another change later on, which was I think in 1986, what happened was that they took the power of the president and gave it to the prime minister, and the president has remained as a figurehead. 1935, before this, we had a Senate. It was bicameral parliament. We had a Senate and the representatives, and what they've done is they got rid of the Senate. They removed all their powers and created a unicameral parliament. So right now what we're seeing is that the president has no power, there is no Senate, so there's one body of parliament. The head of the parliament and the head executive power is the prime minister. So the prime minister has executive power, and he also has legislative power. Another thing that they've done is in 1975, they have given themselves immunity. So they're immune from the law in anything that they do, civil or criminal. Yes, there is a method of bringing forward accusations and taking them to court, but it's extremely, extremely difficult. One of the stipulations, for example, is that they have to be caught red-handed or blah, 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 etc., etc. We won't get into all the fine details of the bureaucracy here, which is the ridiculous level of bureaucracy. I think we're one of the highest levels of bureaucracy in all of the world, let alone Europe. So what we're seeing right now is they basically have consolidated all the power from the legislative branch and the executive branch into one body, and it falls into the hands of one man, which is the prime minister and his administration. Now, the administration are the ministers. The ministers can be chosen by the prime minister from the body of the parliament, which is called the Vuli here. But he also has the ability, or she, to choose anyone they like. So what happens, though, is these ministers are the ones that run the government day to day. It's kind of like the administration of the United States, right? They are unelected, a lot of them. But these ministers can be elected or unelected, as we said, but they also present laws. They present the laws, and then the parliament votes for them. So basically, they also have legislative power. So you can have someone who's unelected presenting laws to be voted on. Now, it's not that they write all these laws. These laws can be written and set up by the rest of the parliamentarians. The problem is that the ones that push these laws through are the administration, and the administration is most likely one party. There have been combinations in the past, but it's mostly one party. Now, how do the elections work here in Elas? Up until very recently, it was a direct vote from the different regions of Elas, and certain MPs were picked from there, and then they become parliamentarians, and then the party that gets the most votes, they vote for their prime minister, and they make the administration. Sorry. My throat was a little bit dry. And what we have is, that's how basically it's set up. Something strange that happened, and it's a little bit unprecedented, was in 2023, we had parliamentary elections, and what happened was that, according to statistics, 50%, some people say 60% of the population didn't vote. And Nea Demokratia, New Democracy, got 40% of that vote. And if you do the math, it comes out to they got the vote of about 20% of the population. All the other parties were 10% or less. So according to the law, according to the Constitution, they shouldn't have been able to form a government. But with a little bit of jerry-rigging and different things that they could do, they manipulated everything. And they, of course, they had 40% of the vote, not 40% of the population. And don't forget that here in Elas, voting is mandatory. That's something that other countries don't have. Voting is mandatory, and if the government can't get the votes needed, they can't form a government. So that's something to keep in mind. So they created the government with only 20% of the whole vote, right? And they have a bonus system, which was created lately. And this bonus system is, if you get, let's say, a certain threshold of votes, then you can give yourself an extra 50 seats in parliament. And that's how New Democracy got the majority. So they have these extra 50 seats. And if you have, in the whole parliament is 300 people. If you have over 150 people, 150 MPs, you can basically pass any laws you want because they're all part of the same party. The administration presents the laws, and who votes for them is the parliament, the Vuli. And what happens is that if you have 150 votes or more, you pass that law. It's, I think, 151 is the threshold, right? And that's if everyone comes to the parliament, which we know it's a very rare thing to happen. So they can pass any laws they want. Except for this, they also have the executive power, which is the prime minister. He governs everything. So there's no checks and balances. There's no real checks and balances between the executive and the legislative. Now let's look at the judicial branch. The judicial branch is the Areopagos. The Areopagos, which is an ancient judicial body of judges, and here in Greece, in Elas, we had 300 judges right now with lifetime appointments. This has been decreased to, I think, around 46 right now, and I think that it should be decreased even further, but that's a different story. What happens is these are lifetime appointments, and who appoints them is the parliament, through the prime minister, of course. And if the parliament is all basically more than half a certain party, they vote in who they like. Now, who oversees what's going on in the judicial branch? Again, it's the parliament, and the Minister of Justice has the power, through some bureaucratic moves, to remove judges from the Areopagos. So basically, they choose the judges, they can remove the judges. Are the judges really able, this is a question that we should be asking everyone, are the judges really able to have oversight of the legislative process? Are they going to really have power over the executive branch? I don't think so. Now, there was a president, as we said, up until 1975. I think 1986, they finally they made the president completely just a figurehead. So who elects him? Well, no one. The parliament, through the prime minister chooses who the next president will be. The parliament elects him through a very bureaucratic process, and then he's elected into that position, or she. We've had women presidents before, and they elect that person in there, and they sit there as a figurehead, and they're supposed to have oversight over the legislature, and they're supposed to have oversight over the prime minister. They can dismiss the prime minister, they can even dismiss Congress or the parliament. What happens, though, is that his power, or whoever is the president, their power comes from the parliament. Is that person really going to have oversight over the parliament? Are they really going to have oversight over the prime minister? Absolutely not. So right now what we see is that all the powers, executive, legislative, and judicial, come to one body, which is the parliament. Now it's unicameral. There's no one to really have oversight over them. They are exempt from the law because they have this special amnesty clause that they added to the Constitution. And so you can't touch them, right, for criminal or civil. And then you have the prime minister, which is in charge of everything, and he's in charge of his administration. He's in charge of the parliament. So do you see the problem? All the powers are brought into one body, and it doesn't matter what checks and balances you've put in place formally. The rest of the changes that they've done to the Constitution and to the laws exempt them from all of this, and they can do whatever they want. And right now, what we have today is a system where one body does everything. So even if they need to if there's like a catastrophe, like here with the fires that happened, the wildfires, to be able to get any money to those people, it doesn't come from the city or the municipal powers that are there, the municipal government, has to come from the central government. And it has to come specifically from one of the ministers. So that's where the money comes from. That's where all of the power really lies, is in the ministers. And those ministers, as we said, can be elected or unelected. So it's a very strange system that has no real checks and balances. So that's why I believe that the system is the problem. And Mr. Mitsotakis is just the symptom of the problem. Yes, he might be going down in history as one of the worst prime ministers, or his administration one of the worst administrations in all of New Hellenic history. And we call this New Hellenic history. It's after 1821, because we have history that goes back thousands and thousands of years. So we want to you don't want to compare him to everyone. We're comparing him now to modern history. He might go down as one of the worst, but when we elect the new prime minister, and the elections are supposed to happen in 2027, but we might have them sooner if the administration falls. Will someone come in that will fix everything, make things better? It's nearly impossible. Why? Because the system is broken. The system is corrupt. And when someone is stepping into that power, into that seat, will they be able to fight the same system that they're in? So here we have politicians that are systemic. They love the system. They want to follow the system. They're usually from the old parties, New Democracy, PASOK. Then we have the anti-systemic. Well, obviously there's also anti-systemic inside those parties, but they don't really voice their opinions that much. We have other parties that are anti-systemic, but they're anti-systemic systemic is how we call them here in Greece, in Hellas. And the reason is why they are following the system, but they say that they're anti-systemic, but they're following the system. So they're part of the system. How is that going to work? What we really need is to change the system. We need to change the Constitution and stabilize it and make it a stable basis of law, a stable foundation for the rest of the government, how things are supposed to be run here, and make it very difficult so that you have to really think before you make various changes to that Constitution. Amendments should be made, obviously, and this is to increase the freedoms and the rights of the people, and not to decrease them and increase only the rights of the political class. And why do I say political class? Is because here in Hellas, it's a very family-oriented system. So everyone that comes to power, a lot of them, they come from the same families. They marry into these families, and it's very, very Romanesque, as I say. So if you read about ancient Rome, you'll see that this happened a lot in the beginning, at the end of the Republic. as we see, the end of the republic. And here what we're having is a crisis, a political crisis. We don't only have an economic crisis, we have a political crisis. Why? Because things are not stable, things are not going well at all. Our population has decreased. We had, a few years ago, we had 11 million people here, and now we're down to, I think, 8 million people. And we have an economic crisis. Why? Because even though supposedly on paper things are getting better, things are just more expensive and people are making a lot less. Their purchasing power parity is very low, and I think we're the lowest in all of Europe. So again, is the problem Mr. Mitsotakis, or is the problem the system? According to me, it's the system, and we need to change the system, change it into something that is more robust, that is balanced, and has checks in all levels of government, so everything can work, so we can have a freer and just and a strong Hellas. And that's better for us here that live here and for the rest of the world, because I don't think Europe wants a weak southern border. And we do a lot of trade from, because we're right in the center of the Mediterranean, so we do a lot of trade north to south, east to west. It helps everyone if there's a strong Hellas. So next time, we're going to go more deep into we're going to dive more deeply into the Constitution and the changes, the 12 changes of the Constitution. And there's even been some changes that didn't have a constitutional vote to change them. They just changed them and based the law the way they like it. So again, it's the system, friends. It's the system. And the system needs to change. See you next time.